I now call this Committee of the Whole of the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. I ask everyone to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our first topic for tonight is data review, attendance, dropout, and graduation rate. I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
So up first, we have tonight is a dropout prevention and data review that's going to go towards that chronic absenteeism, graduation rate, dropout rate for your review. Tonight, to go over that presentation with us is Dr. Jake Klipsch and Lisa Baxter. And we have handouts for you tonight. You'll notice a repeatable format from the previous data presentations. So after that second, we are going to do our first look at our modified allowable growth dropout prevention programming that we are utilizing in our district. We will be bringing that before the board on a vote on December 13th, as that has to be approved by the middle of January. So that being said, I'll turn it over to Jake and Lisa. And of course, Ben, at any time, feel free to jump in on that presentation as well. Thank you. Thank you, Jake, and thank you, Lisa.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So you just received two things, and right now I'm going to, the main document you're going to be using as we move through this is the thicker one. So there's a scientific term for you. So we're going to start with that. And I handed that out so that you can take notes on that document if you want to. That is for you. The slides or the charts that you're seeing are going to be the same ones that are projected. I just wanted to prepare them on paper so that you could take notes, and some of it are pretty busy and a lot of information, and it allows you to see it maybe a little bit easier. So feel free to write down as you go. I also want to let you know that there is going to be time scattered throughout this presentation for some questions. So there's four main pieces of data we're going to be looking at: average daily attendance, which is again on that first slide, chronic absenteeism, graduation rate, and dropout rate. And so the structure of this is I'm going to provide the data for like average daily attendance, and then give you 5 minutes to look at it, ask some clarifying questions, take some notes, and then we're going to do the next one. Keeping in mind that as Superintendent Schneckloss said, this is all connected to the MAG budget review that he just referenced, and so there will be more time even between those two, and then at the end of the presentation as a whole in collaboration with his part of the presentation and the other people that are here, that will also be able to make some connections with that. If you can go to the next slide, please, Brenda. The intended outcomes of this presentation is, one, to review and kind of found this information within the continuous improvement process. I'm sorry. I missed that slide. You're right. So the why, I'm sorry, you're right. As we build, as we revise, as we implement our at-risk and dropout prevention programs, which is, again, what we're here about today, those four indicators are some of the major indicators that we use to measure success. So we use that data to inform decision making, to determine if things are working or if not, or if we need to make adjustments. So and you're reviewing that data to be able to make some of those decisions for this programming moving forward. Next slide, please. So the intended outcomes, going to where I was going before, we're going to review the continuous improvement process, which you're becoming experts in because you see it in almost every presentation, and it's how we do business as we look at that. We're going to examine our current reality of our average daily attendance in chronic absenteeism, examine the current reality of graduation and dropout rates, and then provide opportunities for you to share questions or feedback as we bridge this with what the modified allowable growth budget, which helps to fund some of this programming, as we bridge those pieces together. So on this next slide it's this continuous improvement process that you've seen many times. And I've circled a few different pieces that really start to key in to this presentation today. The current state. Where are we? What is the raw data telling us? We did this same presentation to our district leadership team, our DSAT, our district student achievement team, and we went through, we looked at the data, we asked questions, we identified some strengths and barriers, and then I put a dotted line around create a plan, because this is going to help to inform, almost in an ongoing way, what this plan is to help us to get an impact on the data that we're seeing. So that's how we're steeped into this continuous improvement process. So these three questions, again, Superintendent Schneckloff mentioned a similar format that you've seen over and over with this data review as we become experts in reviewing data and making decisions. And so these are the questions that after each section, we're going to provide a few minutes to let you just sit and think through these pieces. What do you notice? What can we say is true based on the data? What questions do you have? What does it make you wonder? And what are some possible next steps that we might be able to take as a district, as a board, for future discussions with you? So that's just, I'm just grounding you in the mindset of as you take notes and listen. And these questions are in the packet at the end of each section as well. So you'll be able to use those as you write some notes down. All right, so let's jump into it. Average daily attendance. So first off, when we talk about average daily attendance, what are we talking about? So anything in our student information system, which is Infinite Campus, anytime that something is marked absent or an A in campus is included in that calculation. So that includes excused absences, unexcused absences. Anytime a student is absent for any reason, that goes into that calculation when you see that. So just so you're aware of that. We're obviously in a strange time with pandemic and online learning, and so we wanted to make a note that last year, when we first rolled out this online learning, students had to go to a place to do a checkbox to say they were in attendance that day. So some students might have been doing work, but if they didn't check that box saying, I'm in attendance, then it was counted as an absence. This year, that changed. So for online-only students, they only needed to do work, and that automatically allowed them to be marked as in attendance for that particular day. And as an example, if the average daily attendance is 98.2%, that just means that throughout the entire year, students in that group, whatever group we're looking at, were in attendance 98.2% of the time. Pretty self-explanatory on that.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Oh, yes, Director Beck.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. So that means that's the average of all the individuals. So if it's 98.2%, it means that there could be a couple kids who came twice and
Correct.
the vast majority of kids came more often. Okay,
Yes.
just making sure. Thank
Yep.
you.
For that particular group. So on the next slide, you'll start to see what some of these numbers look like. And so I'm going to, if you want to go to the next slide, and this is where you have this information. If you don't want to look up here, it is also in front of you in your packet. Did I put page numbers on there? Yeah. Oh, perfect. So yeah, it's actually page 1 and page, it's 1 and 2 actually. Thank you. So 1 and 2. And so I'm just going to help you to read this across the page. So you can see 2018, 2019, 19 and 20. And then in 20 and 21 and 21 and 22, we separated those out because we were anticipating there was questions about what was the difference between students that were online versus in person. So you can see what that's the difference between the blue and the orange for 20 and 21. It should say that, I thought I put a note on there, that indicates the orange is the online only students. It's on the top of the first page there. And so you can kind of see by race and ethnicity how that's broken out, because we want to make sure that we're looking at all of our subgroups, and as well as you can see IEPs, English language learners, and then the difference between students from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And on the slide next to that, and again, I'm going to pause in a moment here, so I know I'm moving quickly. On the next slide, it does it by level. So you can see elementary, intermediate, high school, and then district overall. So you can see how those numbers play out as well. So,
I was just going to say, our pages are reversed, I think, in case somebody's looking for something. We have the elementary first and then the demographic.
I was trying to
first and
make sure everyone's on their toes there, Dr. Beck. So well done, you figured that out. So I apologize for that if I confused you all. But those are the two major slides as far as average daily attendance. So before I pause for allowing you to really just kind of get 5 minutes of silent time, on the next slide is a few examples of some of the things that we're doing, because you might already be thinking like, so what are the things we're currently doing to to improve in this area? So this isn't all the things that we're doing. These are just some examples. So we have an AmeriCorps attendance works program at our elementary level where we partner with AmeriCorps, and they provide people coming in specifically to work with caseloads of students to address students that need improvements in attendance. For our online-only students, we utilize our student support liaisons to check in with the kids, to follow them, to track them, to call them to make sure that they are, if they're online, that they are doing the work that they need to do. We have attendance coaches. We're using PBIS interventions, check in, check out, where kids come in, they meet with a preferred adult in the morning and throughout the day. McKinney-Vento is the act that provides homeless services for students experiencing homelessness. And so we have a coordinator for that that's reflected in our MAG budget that works that if students are coming to school or not coming to school because of something related to that we are supporting those students in whatever way that we can. We have all the work of our counselors and social workers and a truancy liaison as well. So those are just a few pieces there. So that being said, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to stop talking for a minute and ground us back in those questions about what you notice, what you wonder, what questions that you might have. And the pacing of this presentation today is, I understand it is going to be quick. 5 minutes is not going to be enough time to answer all the questions, but I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes because we're going to have 4 other times throughout to let you simmer through that a little bit. You got that, Mr. Sheen? Thank you, sir. Superintendent Schneckloth, when there's about a minute left, will you let me know? So TJ, keep the timer running, please. At the same time, knowing that our next section is going to be on chronic absenteeism, which in the same realm, you'll have more time. Are there any burning questions, big thoughts that something sticks out that you'd like clarity on, or a few moments just for commenting before we dig into the chronic absenteeism part? Yes, Director Beck.
I would say the two main things I noticed is that as a whole, when we're looking at the ethnicities, generally speaking, attendance rates are, average daily attendance is fairly comparable, except during the pandemic. And I would also say that the pandemic had a huge impact on the low SES students in terms of attendance.
Yes, thank you. And I should note too that the 21-22 data is obviously, it's not the full year. We're not done with the year. It's up to the current point that this data was pulled, which was a few weeks back, just so that you're aware of that. Thank you, Dr. Beck. It's a good point.
Oh, I meant to include the IEP students in that second one too. Clearly, there are a lot of IEP students who were not in attendance a lot last year.
IEP and SES, thank you.
So Jake, for the purposes of this, let's give 5 minutes, and then let's give everybody an opportunity to interact after each section.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay, I was looking at that, and in that group also add the 2 or more races and the Black students with it as well.
I have a question. If I look at 18-19 compared to 21-22, we are decreasing, not necessarily by huge amounts. I take out the year of 2021 because of all the changes and things, but what is different, or what are we doing differently in 18-19 that we aren't doing now, or, you know, is there any idea what's going on that?
If I could just point out, having been a building principal, you know, up until last year, one thing that really has impacted that is anytime a child needs to quarantine or has COVID,
Okay.
you know, that was really something we were always shuffling and still are in our buildings. So that hasn't played well for our attendance. I mean, it's part of the problem.
And those that are not attending online, can we make them come back to in person so hopefully their attendance would improve? I mean, if you're online, these rates should be higher than the in person because you're home. There's the computer. So is there any option here to say, oh, you're not doing it there? Come here.
So if I could speak to that, we have our student support liaisons that are designed for tracking attendance and participation. And we have recently expected and incorporated them within our student intervention team meetings. That's a weekly meeting that exists at each building level. And so we can look at their attendance and say, and this person whose job is to really monitor that, say, hey, little Karen just is not showing up. Her attendance is really rough. Now, we can't go physically pluck them out of their house and bring them, but I will tell you that we have encouraged, and the principals are having those conversations. They're reaching out to the families and saying, what could we do to get you back in? Because this just has not been a successful model. So yes, it is being tracked, it is being monitored, and those conversations are going on.
And I have just one more question. We used to have a truancy officer, and now you refer to it as a truancy liaison. Is there a difference between the two? Is one more effective than the other, or is it basically the same thing, just different title?
Same.
Yeah, it's the same the same thing. I guess I wasn't aware of a different title, but yeah, it's the same, procedures, same thing that person is doing. Probably the same person that was doing it when you were in our schools, I believe, too. Marty Lopez. Yeah.
No, we got rid of him a long
No.
time ago, the truancy officer part, but, so I just wondered if there was something different.
Director Beck?
All of this has me really thinking about one big question, not necessarily related to chronic absenteeism, but average daily attendance.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess I'm trying to figure out, how do we balance encouraging kids to stay home when they have respiratory illness
Mm-hmm.
versus encouraging them to come to school? And it's been a problem prior to the pandemic as well, because you don't want somebody with the flu to come to school if they're contagious, but it's more of an issue now, I think, than it has been, and people are more aware of it. So, I don't want to see 100% attendance if there's a bunch of people in the classroom coughing up a lung. So I guess that's sort of the biggest question here is, what do we really want to see, and what do we want? Because I want students to stay home if they're sick,
Yeah.
because that's what they should do. They need to recover, they need to rest and get better, and also not share germs.
See Mr. Driscoll, the microphone.
So you bring up a very important point, Dr. Beck, and what I would suggest is that is really the reason that we look at both data points, is your average daily attendance could be a different person every day. And if we were hovering around that, 90, 93, 94, 95, we'd feel great about that, assuming it's not the same kid each day. And that is the key reason to check both the ADA and the chronic absenteeism. Because then if I look and I say, little Ryan Driscoll, he misses about a day a week, and it seems like it's always on Monday. Like, what's going on with that? Then you reach out to that family. And so the same thing that we were just talking about here with Director Klein-Jerome is the important part, because that number only tells you so much. It's what are we doing with that number? And so that student intervention team at the building level is responsible for looking at really, and they're all interconnected, academics, how are we doing there, behavior, social, emotional, and then attendance. And when is one thing leading to the next, because I come back after being gone. And so that team is responsible for monitoring that. And the chronic absenteeism is probably the most important point you want to look at.
Since average daily attendance and chronic absenteeism are connected and been segued into that, if I may, can we go into that chronic absenteeism piece, and then we'll have more time to make those connections. So on that next slide, it says what chronic absenteeism is. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Brenda. The first piece is just a quote directly from the state of Iowa about children who miss 10% or more of the days they should be in school for any reason are considered chronically absent, which makes sense. You need to be in school. It's for us to have the impact that we want to have. So the way it's calculated, students who have an ADA of 89% or less are considered chronically absent. So on the following slides, an 8% would mean that 8% of students in that group, whether it's demographic group or grade level overall, in that group have an average daily attendance of 89% or less. So now, and here's where I apologize to make this more confusing than I wanted. I gave you a slimmer packet. I was talking with our data guru today that pulls this for us, and he indicated there was an issue with the data for chronic absenteeism. So please this is the accurate numbers. The one that is on the slide or that was in the thicker packet is not fully accurate, and we want you to make sure you have the most accurate information. So using this information here for this, that's the one we want you to consider, to take a look at. And you can see it's broken out in the same way from 1819 to the current day, with the last 2 years broken out by in-person and online. And then on the second sheet, you can see it broken out by all those various subgroups. I also, on this page at the very top, I broke it out by in-person and online, and then I realized I didn't put the overall percentage. So that's what this says overall for the last 2 years, combining in-person and online. So it says overall 55.4. That means that in the 2020-21 2021 school year, the overall chronic absenteeism rate was 55.4%. So that's why that number is on there. So again, 5 minutes, Superintendent Schneckloff, for them to review silently, take notes, and then we'll have another chance for discussion.
Halfway point.
All right, so we're gonna do this a little different. I'm gonna go around, so each, Director Potts, if you wanna start out, go ahead.
So if I read this correctly, on elementary, 23.7% have an attendance rate of 89% or less.
For in-person students.
I'm
Overall,
talking in person. I'm talking in person.
Yep.
Okay. So that would mean 23 out of every 100 kids?
correct, have an average daily attendance of 89% or less for in-person learners.
But we have a 92.6% attendance rate.
For average daily attendance?
Yeah. So I'm assuming, if you look at it superficially, it's how could you have a 90% attendance rate if 23% of the kids are not in attendance 89% of the time? But I'm assuming it's offset by the kids that are there 100% of the time.
Yes, that's, and we can make a note of that to get to our data person to help with that. But yes, what I would read for that is that the kids that are, this reflects the kids that are missing, like the density of amount of days out of school that they're actually missing. But that is a good question. I can try to get some clarity on how to make sense of those two numbers and how they jive together.
Can I follow up a clarifying question on that?
What's that?
I just wanted to clarify something on those numbers. So could it be that those 23% of kids are missing, say, 11 days instead of the 10, whereas there's a few, 5% are missing 30 days or something? I guess.
Yes, that would actually probably, they fall into that number if they're at, at that 89% or less. I see you nodding your head, Mr.
Or not 11 days, but 11%, right. Okay, so I guess I'm trying to kind of,
Yep,
yeah, I think what you said you would get would be helpful with that.
sure. Did you make a note of that?
Director Gordon.
I am not good at reading data, so if I have completely misinterpreted this, please let me know. But from what I'm understanding, both overall absenteeism and chronic absenteeism is lower in the high school grade than it is in the other grade levels, which I find interesting, and I wonder why that is. Like, what are they getting from online that they're not getting in school? Why are they more likely to show up in attendance online than in person? And then the chronic absenteeism was just crazy last year, obviously. But the Black and African American population was exorbitantly higher chronically than everything else, with the IEPs coming in close second. And I wonder how much overlap is there between the IEP, the ELL, the low SES, and the different races. I would be interested to see that data.
Sure, we can definitely find that.
Dr. Klipsch, can I jump into Director Potts' question?
Absolutely.
So that kind of conflict between chronic absenteeism and average daily attendance. For the sake of this example, let's say we had a school of 100 kids. In that school, according to this data, 23.8, so for the sake of this, we'll say 24. 24 kids are chronically absent, right? In the example that I'm giving here, we'll say, and we have a 92% average daily attendance. Well, how does that work? Well, that means in this example, 8 kids are gone a day. So those chronically absent kids, they're not gone every day. They're just below 89%, which means they might miss 15 or 20 in the total year of 180 days. So this kid might miss this day and this kid. And so of those 24, 8 of them are gone. I'll take that back. Maybe 5 of them are gone each day, and sprinkle in 1 or 2 or 3 others that are not chronically absent. So that's how you can have 23 or 24% chronically absent and have a 92% average daily attendance, is because they're not missing every day. It's just a couple of them sprinkled. And once they hit 10 or 15 days, they're considered chronically absent. But our average daily attendance can remain above 90. Not helpful?
No, yeah.
Okay.
Director Hayes.
With the current data here, the online students, of course, that has gotten much better than it has been. But I have major concerns for the IEP students and the SES students because they're in person. They're not going as much as they need to. And with them, you know, you have the special things set up for them to assist them. And I'm concerned that they're not getting what they need, not being there. And with that, you know, it almost, I can't project what could possibly happen, but if you're not getting it, what you need, that could lead to the dropout.
Absolutely, yeah. So you're talking about on
the chronic attendance.
chronic absence, looking at IEP and low SES for in-person learners, you're seeing that there's still a higher number of chronically absent in those subgroups.
Yes, the 37 and the 34. Well, actually, 34 is with the Black and African American also.
Yeah.
So those are some pretty high numbers, although the online students has dropped considerably.
Yeah, and I think it is with 180 school days. If you get quarantined for 10 days, you're at 9.4% missing the school year right there with one quarantine. And then looking at that through the lens of the impacts of poverty, and I'm only going to ask another I mean, this is just more to be considering, is what is the disproportionate impact of the pandemic and COVID on our low-income students and that. So again, that's not an answer to the question. It's just like, yes, this is impacting that we need to really use our strategies and our tools and our staffing and the programming that, again, we're going to tie into after this to really focus in on those subgroups that are hit harder from the pandemic.
Now, from these chronic in-persons, when it gets so high, is it possible that they can go to online while they're having problems? Or is it just one or the other? If you're in person, you have to stay in person. But if it's chronic, would online help you get through it? Is that an option?
Yeah, I mean, we weigh all those questions. We do that on a kid-by-kid basis. What we could tell you is that our online learning overall has not academically shown as much of an impact as we would like to see. So in general, if they're not, we want students in school, because even if they're not showing up, we don't want to just put them, say, like, let's just say you're online then. We want to make sure that it's the right decision for the students, and that would include using our counselors, social workers, SSLs, whoever those people are, to reach out to those families to say, what's going on here? What's the problem? And if it is something that they would benefit more from online learning, then we can definitely go that route, but we would want to do that on an individualized basis.
Thank you.
Director Potts, you had a question?
Yeah. So this statistic, this 23.7% is based on when this data was pulled, correct?
Correct.
For this year, I'm talking.
Correct.
Exactly.
So does the percent, the 89% target, does that change longitudinally? So that since we have less than a semester, is it only 5 days put you on the docket? And then in third quarter, 7.5 puts you in that category. And
Yes, after 2 weeks of school, if they had missed 3 days, they'd be chronically absent because they'd be at 70%.
So
And then at 3 weeks, then that percentage changes. Yes.
so would it be reasonable to assume that though this number is 23%, some of the students that are in this category are really not chronically absent because they had some sort of a health problem that took them out of school for 7 or 8 days, or they broke their leg or whatever, so that I'm assuming then the teams in the building filter through that and decide, Fred is not chronically absent. His mother can't stand him at home anyway. She's going to send him to school every day.
Well,
The Driscoll
by
kids
the,
are always there.
All right, but so you really then, I'm assuming then the team there targets not 23 out of 100 kids in your building. So if you have an elementary school of 400 kids, you're not talking about 100 kids that you have to target.
you would want to ensure that regardless of the reason that they're at home, whether it's because when we're talking about chronically absent, we're not necessarily meaning truant, meaning that like we just don't know, they don't seem to care, whatever, all those types of things that you might hear. If they're at home because they broke a leg or they're at home because they're sick, we need to make sure that we still are considering what's going on and what are we going to do for that student. So, because as the definition that's on the board right now, and for any reason, if they're out for 10% or more, that's where that definition of chronically absent is.
But we have finite resources, and so those resources have to be apportioned appropriately to where the greatest need is.
Right.
So if you look at a student that had a broken leg and missed a week, so they're chronically absent now, we wouldn't probably put 10 different interventions in place for that kid. We just hope he doesn't break the other leg. And so we move forward. But this kiddo that's like missing a day or two every week, that's the kid we need to target. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of having our SIT teams, our student intervention teams in our buildings, which meet at least weekly. And this is one of the data points that leaders have their eyes on every week. Looking at that attendance, who is chronically absent? Oh, no, they're quarantined, or no, they have this. And then, making sure, like you said, with our resources that we're aligning that to, folks that need that help.
Director Klein, Jerome?
What count, is it a full day absent? I taught high school and I would have kids that didn't come first, second, and third block and show up at fourth. Does that count that they're there, or how does an absent count? Does it have to be the whole day?
Yeah, no, they are able, like if they're there fourth block, that is factored into the calculation. So it would be not like 90 minutes present, and that factors into the overall number of minutes in that given period of time or the school year.
So we are doing minutes, since that's how we are counting our hours or
by sections of the day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And in this also tardiness, it's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to my 95% observation, 3 kids came in late,
Mm-hmm.
and 2 apparently came in after I'd left, which is an hour into school.
Mm-hmm.
And this, it's a big deal to catch these elementary kids, because I have taught elementary, and then I had some of the same kids in high school, and the problem just follows them all the way through. So if we don't address it and get them there, it just keeps going.
Yes.
But tardiness, where are we also addressing that? Because that used to be that is a big deal.
Well, as far as how it's documented, if a kid comes in 15, 20 minutes late and it's marked T for tardy, that's not factored into this. If it remains an A for, like I said, absent for any reason, that is factored into this. So that is an issue for sure, is we need to make sure that these kids that are late, that are tardy, if it's that we're also intervening for those kids in a certain way. But as far as what these numbers are showing, these are only connected to if it was marked A for absent for any reason. So at the elementary level, if they did come in 30 minutes late, and the teacher says, initially marked it as absent, oh, they were just really late, and changes it to tardy, it's no longer reflected into this. So it's almost like a related issue, but different than what we're seeing right here, is that we still need to figure out how to get kids to school on time to get the content that they need when the school begins.
And do we count them, like if they came in the afternoon, not in the morning, like half a day absent and a half a day present? And same for intermediate? Is there a...
Well, for intermediate, in high school, they have it broken up by periods, and so they would able to say absent or tardy by period. The elementary level, we might have to look into that. That might be a note, unless you...
Yeah, I know that we can do a half day absent. I've seen that in our data.
Director Poston?
Well, when I look at this chart here, I guess the first thing I would do is just put an X through 2021. I don't think there's a lot that we could have done there. But what really glares at me is the absenteeism for online learners. I mean, how can you be absent that much when you're online? Okay. The other thing is when I was making school visits last spring, I heard a lot of complaints from principals that nothing was being done about truancy. And, you know, if there's no repercussions, what is going to change this? So if a parent is absolutely not sending their kid to school for no good reason, there should be some repercussions to those families. So if they know there's no repercussions, how are we going to change these figures? Okay. And if you ignore 2021 and then you look, like just for example, elementary 14 and then 1920 it was 17, 21, 22, it's at 23. So, I mean, it's going up unless you can consider that a carryover from COVID. I know in some cases the principals were actually going out and trying to contact the families. So whose responsibility is it? The principal's responsibility or the staff or the truancy officer? I mean, who's really responsible and who is putting in any teeth into any repercussions?
Well, to start, the principal as the building leader should be a part of those intervention team meetings, and they are calling, they are doing home visits, they're guiding their staff to do all the same things, trying to figure out why kids aren't there, trying to bridge gaps with transportation, figuring all those pieces out. As far as the teeth, as far as the truancy protocol, we do have someone that's doing that, and we've been having those discussions. It is difficult, and it is a timely process. We've been discussing how to make that more efficient and user friendly, because ultimately, if we go that route, and it goes to a court case or a ticket of some sort, there is a lot within the legal system now that we have to make sure that we show and track, and that's where there's a lot of difficulty with the paperwork and documentation of the interventions that we're doing. That's a bit of a bigger issue, and I don't know, we could probably speak to that at a different group, or if Mr. Schneckloff has anything.
Well, absolutely there needs to be teeth, and that needs to be always needs to be there. The thing that we ground ourselves in is, and you saw it on one of the previous slides, is the attendance works. And so there's a clearinghouse for best practices research on attendance and what works. And 3 or 4 years ago, we put together a plan at our elementary schools for that. And it's all about individualizing, utilizing just exactly what you talked about. Who's the most chronic? Okay, let's attach human beings to this, build a relationship, talk about the reasons why, tear down all the barriers for coming to school. Align resources in the community and all those different things. That's the absolute best practice for that. And obviously the court system is there, but we do struggle with the court system. That has never been a strategy that has turned the attendance around for people, but that strategy is there. We do have a truancy liaison that captures all of those interventions, does everything necessary, all the paperwork necessary, and then does turn that in through the school resource officer. So, all right, what we have found to work the best is when you have a team of people identifying the chronic absenteeisms. And here's what you have as a building. You have those people who their parents just didn't know. Like say if you're at a secondary and the phone call does it. Then you have a family who is working second, third shift, and the kid might need an alarm clock, or they're buddied up with a ride with somebody. So then there's these different interventions. And then you have somebody, and I bet you all of the people that have been in a building before, they said, I call this kid every day to make sure that kid's out of bed, or drive by the house and honk, or whatever the strategy is to get that kid to school every day. And so that's been, for us, the best attendance plan to get students to come to school.
Well, I don't see that being reflected in these figures. So what you're saying is we're not going to make any changes here because it's too tough to put teeth into the whole process?
Well, we initiated our attendance works, I believe it was in the 17-18 or 18-19 school year, and we were seeing pretty good growth out of that across the areas where we had attendance works plans. We also went out and got AmeriCorps workers and assigned AmeriCorps people in every building to help assist with that, and that was being very successful, and then the pandemic broke out. One of the things that we see all throughout our district is it's like we have to go pre-pandemic and pick up the plans that we had and get moving back forward with our plans. And so I'm optimistic in that realm because like what you're saying, Director Poston, is that there needs to be a continuum and there needs to be a hammer, but all along the way there has to be, because it's not okay to not send your kid to school. But it's the way that we move within our MTSS system is that we start by calling, putting a plan in place, and utilizing those resources that way. We were seeing some gains. That was pre-pandemic, and then everything has just been blown up with it. Now we're moving forward.
So are those two programs going to be put into place?
They're there. We need to pick them back up again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's going to be picked up by your leadership teams and implemented then?
Yes.
Okay.
At our elementary schools, that's where attendance work. I think did it go to middle schools or not? Just elementary schools. And so that's where our attendance works was. And I believe there was a plan to keep moving forward with it, but then the pandemic happened. So yes, that is a part of our goals always to improve our attendance. So hopefully that.
Yeah, I just think like a lot of other things, it's moving very slowly, and we can use the pandemic as an excuse, I guess, for a while, but we can't continue to use that as an excuse.
I would agree.
Director Beck?
Quick question before I ask my question. The 1920 numbers, we shut down and everybody was online voluntarily in March. And that was what, like a whole quarter, basically?
Mm-hmm.
Do these numbers include kids who didn't do the voluntary work?
It does not, because it was voluntary, so this only includes up until that point.
Okay, good. I mean, not good, but
Yeah.
that adds some clarity. So I guess my thought would be, the 1819 and 1920 data are what we would consider baseline data. And kind of like Director Poston, I don't think there was a whole lot we could do in the 2021 school year. It was, I see that as an outlier. But that doesn't mean we should ignore it, because what this is telling me is that the students, a huge number of our students didn't get the basic skills they need to be successful now. And so even though we're pushing early literacy in K through 3, there's a whole bunch of 4th, 5th, and 6th graders out there who didn't finish their K through 3 literacy building, and we're ignoring them or not giving them the support they need. And you could take that argument all the way up, right? But those foundations of literacy happen in K through 3, as we've been discussing. And there's a lot of kids in elementary school right now who didn't get that because, not just because of the pandemic, but because of these chronic absenteeism numbers. And so I guess I'm starting to think that maybe we need to expand our early literacy
Yeah.
push.
It's a great point. And I will say, our 4th, 5th, and 6th. So when we do our early literacy implementation visits, we go into the buildings after we provide professional learning for our staff. We talk about 4th, 5th, and 6th grade also. We look at the percentages on their data of proficiency in these different areas as well, and talk about what interventions we're putting in place for those groups also. So I heard you say ignoring 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and I want you to know, and I understand it was just a word, but that when we go into buildings, we are looking at those data. We go from kindergarten, and we look at every the proficiency levels on our benchmarks for every grade by section K through 6. So we are looking at all that and what are we doing for each of those groups and putting things in place. So I did want to say that.
Yeah, so I guess I thought I corrected myself, but I know ignoring isn't really the right word, but we're using COVID money to push early literacy K through 3, and I'm hoping we see results. But I think we need to think about putting some of that towards the foundation stuff that many of our 4th through 6th graders didn't get when they were in kindergarten through or 1st through 3rd grade. So I guess that concerns me. The other big concern I have is that the numbers for students with IEPs are awful, especially for the pandemic. So that's essentially an entire, or for that major pandemic year. We're still in a pandemic. I don't want to pretend, I can't say that we're not, but for the 2021 school year, that's essentially a lost year for a lot of students. And then looking at the demographic data by ethnicity, our students of color are really at a disadvantage. And I don't have the immediate answer, but we're not, we got to figure that one out because that really concerns me a lot. So.
I think a lot of my questions got answered. One thing on the kids with the IEPs, and I understand this is only first semester, and then we'll be going into second semester, so some of this stuff can be corrected. Does this add? Well, it probably does add to like lost compensatory education and things like that for the kids with the IEPs. Is that, or is there something in place to make sure?
Dr. Klipsch.
Yes, I was sensing Kim Hoffman behind me.
Feel me coming up?
Yes.
Good evening. Great question. So if a student is not attending school because they're sick, or maybe a parent isn't even reporting them in, we are not responsible from a comp ed perspective for that instruction. That being said, what we want to do is with any kid is really monitor if they're not attending school, why aren't they attending? Because we need them to be engaged in order to be able to instruct and support. But from a legal perspective, we are not held responsible if a kid's sick, for instance. Now, what we want to do is if a student's sick and they come back the next day, just like a gen ed kid, we're going to try to make up that homework and kind of catch the kid up as much as we can. So oftentimes what you'll see with special education services is they'll like do a double up or try to find time to get the student what they missed when possible. So that's kind of how they try to account for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
And then you pretty much answered all my other questions, but so if I understand this correctly, you're reviewing this data with us, then you're going to take it back to your teams and you'll have it broken down by the kiddo, by the class probably. That way we can just address it right away. I don't want it to sound, it sounds all doom and gloom, but at least there's a plan in place to individually figure out who these kiddos are that are missing the time so that we can make sure that we find out whatever the roadblock is to make sure that their educational needs are met.
Yes, absolutely. So right now it's like, this is big picture. This is what the data shows us. We don't want to pretend it's not there. Like this is it. We've taken it to our district leadership team. We've examined it. What are the strengths? What are the barriers? What do we need to do next? Our building principals take this to their building leadership teams and their student intervention teams. And they keep drilling down to like, okay, this particular student, why is he or she not here? Is it transportation? Is it because or is there something, why is this subgroup not as engaged in our school community as we'd like to see? And looking at those individual students and directing actions and following up on those actions with every single kid.
So then hopefully when you present this to us at the end of the year, the numbers look better.
I certainly hope so.
Absolutely. On those teams, is there someone from special ed represented to, and I don't know if you can answer this, but to address those IEP issues to make sure everything's met there?
Yes, there is special education representation on intervention teams, which is typically where this conversation would take place.
And that is my question too. Who makes up the student intervention team? I mean, you have a special ed teacher, and what other positions would be on there?
Yeah, so typically there is the general education teacher, especially at elementary. If I'm a third grade teacher and I have one of my students struggling, I would be part of that intervention team because I technically know the student best because I see them every day. But then when we think about interventions team, it's usually your specialist. So think about your Title I teacher or your counselor or those kind of specialist people in your buildings who can look at the student in maybe a different way and come with some different interventions and insights to help support the student. So that AEA person is typically on the intervention team, as well as a special education teacher or two, possibly. The principal or assistant principal typically sits in, and any other, I would say, special type of person that you might have in your building that could provide perspective and have some intervention background and knowledge. So I'd say that's in general. Every building probably looks a little bit different, but those in general, that's what those teams are comprised of.
And my last question, I think, and obviously you have to dive deeper in this data, I assume, and then I guess it's probably too early to ask if you found like trends. Is it a particular thing or obstacle that is in the kids' way of making it to school? Is it a particular area of town, a school? And it's probably too early to say that, but I imagine you're able to dig in deep on that stuff.
Yes, and as it's already been pointed out, students from poverty are more highly representative, which has pockets throughout Davenport, and yeah, so we've done that analysis to try to figure out with poverty, is it parents working? Is it a transportation issue? Is it access to city bus? What was that? Homelessness, obviously. We have a greater proportion of students experiencing homelessness and all the effects that come with that. And so, yes, all of those things are being looked at very closely.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone else have any other questions? Director Hayes.
For especially the IEP, the ELL, and SES, is there a way that we can break that down into truancy versus actual illness?
As in unexcused absences versus excused absences of some sort? I'm sure we could do that, yeah. Yep. Thank you, Lisa.
I would like to remind the board that this is the first section, and I believe we have,
We're halfway there.
we're halfway there. So as your timekeeper, these are all great conversations. I don't want to cut them short, but.
So with that being said, are we okay moving forward and we can keep circling back? All right. So can you go, Brenda, to a few slides ahead on graduation rate? Keep going. One more, I think. There we go. So switching gears a little bit, although all of this is connected, right? If a kid's not in school, if they're falling behind, if they're not in attendance, that impacts graduation. It impacts the likelihood of dropping out. So we're going to switch gears a little bit into graduation rate. So I'm not going to read this slide for you, but we have 4- and 5-year graduation rates. The 4-year graduation rate is calculated by the number of students who graduate divided by the number of students that 4 years ago started as a freshman, taking into account students who transferred in, adding them in, and pulling out students who transferred out. So when we have our reasoning time, you can go back in here and look at this calculation, but that's the overall graduation rate. And then with 5 years, it's the same thing. It just includes an extra year of students who needed it, one more year to get their credits completed. So on the next slide, you can see what these numbers look like. Keep going down a little bit more, please, so we can get the full piece there. And we are back into the bigger packet now. So you can leave aside the chronic one. That was the only one that had errors in it. So we're looking at the bigger packet. So before we dive into this overall, I do want to note that, as Director Beck alluded to earlier, in April of 2020, the board voted to revise graduation requirements because that's where pandemic just dropped us. And so students missed the term. And so graduation requirements were changed just for that end of that year, because we didn't want students who were supposed to be graduating to be negatively impacted because they didn't have access to take the classes to get credit. She said it was statewide. I don't know if that's the case. So it was Davenport wide. I'm not sure. We could look into that if you want. But students that didn't have access to 2 additional credits for that last term, and so the graduation requirements were changed. So you can see that reflected, or that should be considered when looking at the data for the 1920 school year. And then you can see in the bottom right a comparison for state averages as well. And then again on the next slide, it's graduation rates by subgroups. As we know, we need to be looking at subgroups to make sure that we are addressing all of that. So similar to the structure we've had before, I'm going to let you look at that data, look at those graduation rates. Superintendent Schneckloss, if you could put 5 minutes on the clock, and then we will have another discussion. And then we'll end this by going to dropout rate and doing the same thing one more time. Director Gosi, you want to guide us again here?
Director Klein-Drum, are you ready?
Yep. I find the 5-year graduation rate a little confusing. So if I'm looking at 2017-18, I can assume that 86.8% of all students who entered and would have graduated in 16-17, it would really be 86.8%. Is that correct? So I'm looking at my 5-year graduation rate, but in the year previous, that would be the total number of kids who graduated.
Not the ones that were in the year previous, but that enrolled, I guess for 5 years, it would be 5 years before that, when they enrolled at that.
But this form that you have says the 5-year cohort rate, it will maintain the same denominator as the previous year 4-year rate, simply adding students who graduate in the 5th year to the numerator. So I'm assuming that
I see.
the 86.8 is of how many kids were in the 2016-17 class as 9th graders. Would that be right?
We're looking at the 2017-18 school year, right?
Uh-huh.
And you're looking
And
at
I'm
the
looking at
5-year
the red
graduation
bar.
rate. We're looking at, and actually, we're looking at 4 years. So those students ideally should have graduated in 16-17, right? That's the cohort you're talking about.
Right.
So we're still looking at the students that started as a freshman 4 years before the 16-17 school year, and we're just adding in those additional students that needed 1 extra year.
So in total of the class of 2017, eventually 86.8 of them graduated.
Correct.
Okay. Do others go on and get GEDs? Do they drop out? Do they stay a 6th year? And how do we count IEP students that are entitled to education to 21? Are they considered graduated at this year, but we give them education to 21, or are they not figured into the graduation rate, or how do we account for those?
Well, as Kim returns to the table, which I'm assuming that makes sense, I will say that we do have students that graduate in 6 years, that graduate in 7 years, and they're not included in this 5-year rate. So that is a good question about how do we eventually account for those students. But the students in the state of Iowa have up until their 21st birthday to graduate from high school, and we do have students that take all of that time. Not many, but they do take all that time to stick with that, and they have that opportunity to do so. As far as with the IEP, I'll let Kim answer that question.
I think what you explained, Jake, applies to students with disabilities as well. And so, to my knowledge, that if a student stays past that 5th year, that their graduation rate doesn't show up anywhere. It would show up in IEP or special education data that we pull that's separate from this data report here. So they show up on that side, but they don't show up in the general education graduation processes of looking at a 4th and 5th year. That being said, it's a very small number of kids. It's usually, probably 3 to 5 in a district this size. It's very minuscule. And those students have very specific plans that they are engaging in that may keep them till they're 21, or some students may go till they're 19, just kind of depending on what those individual students need. So typically, if a student stays till they're 21, they're not going to show up in a 4 and 5 year graduation rate. That being said, so we don't get a diploma if they're going to stay longer, right? They get the diploma when they get to the end, whenever it is that they leave at 19, 20, or 21. We also have students that would show up in this scenario. They're called access students. So they're students who actually meet graduation requirements of a student with a disability. I meet my requirements, but basically I'm going to delay getting my diploma for a year, and it automatically makes me a 5th year graduate so that they can get some more transition services, typically from a community college. Those students would be included in the 5-year rate. So it kind of depends. A long answer.
So once they get the diploma, they aren't entitled to further services till 21?
Correct.
Okay.
So once you are awarded a diploma, you are no longer allowed or required to be provided services. But if we hold the diploma and we continue to support you past your high school, your 4 or 5 years, we will continue to provide service.
Okay.
So it just depends. Yeah, good clarification.
Director Poston?
I don't have any questions, just a couple comments. Again, the students with IEPs and ELs, quite low graduation rate. I guess I do have one question on the ELs. Why did it in 2018 jump up? Was there something that was changed in the way those were counted, or what happened there?
That is a good question, and I don't think our new EL coordinator who is here probably can answer that quite yet, or maybe you can, or. Yeah, no, but that's something we can look into, because I did notice that also, and that is why would that jump? So we can look into that one and get back to you.
Director Beck?
I guess it's disheartening but not surprising, the pattern I see in that students in almost every group other than white students are graduating at lower rates. And I guess my biggest concern is those ELL students, because clearly something is happening. It doesn't matter what year you look at, they're graduating at much lower rates than everyone else. So I don't know if it's a matter of our programming earlier on not being sufficient, or a combination of circumstances, because typically those kids come from homes where either maybe they came to this country for the first time, you know, during their schooling, or else, you know, there's other barriers that are going to be there besides just the language. Yeah.
And just so you're aware, the Jen Van Fleet is sitting behind me. Not only helps with our title programming, our MAG budget and all that, but she also is in charge of our EL programming, and she's new this year and is a rock star. And so I can only imagine she's vigorously taking notes about what she's hearing so that she can dig into that information.
Director Potts.
I know who you meant.
Director Gordon.
The graduation rates overall, is that for students that, I mean, do we know that they haven't graduated because they have dropped out, or do we know that these people, this doesn't include people who have left the district? It's just dropout versus graduate, correct?
It's not necessarily perfectly two sides of the same coin. And we're going to talk about dropout in a moment here. So as we talked about, if a student takes 6 years, they're not a dropout and they're not in these graduation rates. So there's some pieces in there that aren't reflected. So yeah, it's not, and again, we'll get into dropout here in just a second. So I wish it was that easy, but it's a little, it gets more complex as you dig farther in.
Beyond that, all my comments and questions are the same that have already been asked.
Director Hayes.
Most of mine have as well, but I did have the IEP stuck out a lot to me. And one group that is more consistent, in my opinion, than the others are the 2 or more races. In the first 2 years, they were pretty much averaged out about the same. And in the last 2 years, they were about the same. And what different took place with them where they pretty much remained consistent for each of the groups that they were in, with the 78 and the 77 and then the 81.2 and 81.4. Just they're about the most consistent group here.
That's a great point. I didn't notice that one. I did notice the IEP, and I do want to recognize a 70% graduation rate is not good. I get that. And the last 3 years, 58, 64, 70, there is a trajectory that is slowly on the right track with that. And we have to keep in mind the 1920 school year that we dropped the graduation requirements. So there's probably some pieces in there. But that number that red bar is was on the rise based on this data. But you're absolutely right about the 2 or more races. That was an interesting observation.
Director Potts, do you have something?
Just a question. Is a student considered an ELL student the entire time they're enrolled, or is there an exit?
There's an exit. There's an exit. So a student may enter and be identified as a student, as an ELL student, and then as they are provided services and their language grows, they have the ability to exit services. And then they would not be counted as an ELL student in the data when that happens.
Okay, so this ELL graduation rate only are those ELL students who have not been exited from the ELL program, or graduate, or moved on, or no longer need services, or have mastered English.
Correct.
Any
So-
combination of that?
Right, probably all of the above. And so they entered as a 9th grade EL student, is my guess. That's how they're counted. And then they look to see, when they look at the 4-year graduation rate, are those identifications still the same, whether it's EL or IEP? And then they would remove them or, put them in a different pot at that point in time.
So perhaps a more accurate assessment of the effectiveness of our ELL program would be the total number of students that were serviced over K as to how, and then graduated.
Correct. You'd want to, for your ELL services or students with disabilities, you'd want to look at any point in their career where they identified or receiving extra services. And if those students graduated, and with or without the label, that's a success either way of all your programming, regardless of what point they had it.
It is another really interesting observation, though. That's a good point that we're
Well,
talking about.
there's,
Is that right?
with
It'd be interesting
a
to dig
lot
into
of our statistics, it says one thing, but there's a need for background information to understand exactly what that number is really telling us.
Yep.
Exactly.
Because when I look at ELL, I say, okay, that's, every kid. Well, it isn't. And I bring that up from my own personal experience with our son. He was in ELL for about 3 weeks, and they said, "Get
And they
out."
kicked him out.
Director Beck?
Yeah, that actually changes my perspective on those numbers. I mean, I still would love to see them higher, but it tells me that the kids here are probably not the kids who were in our ELL program for the most part in elementary school, because you tend, at least it's my understanding, that you tend to acquire sufficient skills if you start earlier, right? So you're less likely to be an ELL student, and Jen's nodding her head back there. So these are probably more likely to be students who didn't even start officially learning English as a second language until much later, high school, which is going to make a big difference.
The other size too is we're not looking at N sizes. We're just looking at percentages. So I think that matters as well. That if you were to look at an N size as a freshman and then now, so again, to your point, this is one view of it, but there's so many intricacies that go into the data that you would need to look at in order to truly get a picture of what do we need to do differently in the system to influence these numbers.
Right. Can I ask a follow-up? So to that question, then, it kind of goes back to what Director Gordon asked about some of our absenteeism data, is how much overlap. If we know that there's disproportionality in graduation rates, we can say that the N size, we have a better idea of what the N size of sort of the ethnicities subgroups is than these other ones, right? So we also typically have a better understanding of the IEP group sizes. So I guess my question would be how much overlap is there between those students with IEPs and those students who are Black and African American or Hispanic, right? And we know that the district, our particular district, got cited for over-representation, a few years ago. And so that I don't know, it's just an interesting way an interesting thing that I'm thinking about right now.
There's a theme developing for me as I watch us dig through this data, because we were beginning to have these conversations. We were beginning to put together dashboards before the pandemic. We did look at if you are in this subgroup, in this subgroup, in this subgroup, what happens? And we had that data, and it's exactly what you would think. If the cards are stacked against you, your scores, it is just so much harder for you, which is another reason why we need to continue to provide the resources, reach out to families, and do all the hard work that our staff are doing.
Saying that then, so if I am a Hispanic student with an IEP, am I counted twice on a graph, or am I only in one place?
That is a good question. I believe you're actually counted as a student with an IEP, and if you're also Hispanic, you're counted as a Hispanic student also.
That's my understanding as well. I'd need to triple check that, but that's how you understand it? Yeah.
I guess I'd like to know numbers. I'd like to know what that denominator is of these groups. So I know, are we talking 70% of 10 kids, of 100 kids? Because now that you're putting them in two groups, I would like a better handle on it. I want real numbers versus the percentage.
That's good feedback.
When you say numbers, meaning like IEP for 2020, it says 70% of X amount of kids for each subgroup. Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, I mean, like
Or for any of the groups, I mean.
all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to know.
The number of actual students.
I want to know how many kids graduated that potentially, I mean, what is 83.13% overall graduated? How much is that? Is that 300 kids, 400 kids?
Sure.
I need a real number baseline on all of these, because if you put them into more than one group, then I want to know if it 10, 20, 50.
Yep, we can get that.
Everyone's already asked all the questions. The percentages, how they were a little bit higher in 2017, and then they dipped, and some of them are coming up, but some of them are still pretty low, which obviously, again, I know you all are gathering the data, and then you're going to put together some stuff to implement to figure out what are some of the obstacles on some of these things. But isn't the state average, isn't 85% for graduation rate? Isn't that the state average?
The 4-year graduation rate in the 1920 school year was 91.6%, and for the 5-year graduation rate, it was 93.8%.
Okay. Is there a different percentage for students with an IEP or any other students, or everyone is held to that?
Everyone is held to the same graduation requirements, even students with disabilities.
And the number I gave you was the state average. It wasn't the requirement. I believe I could look that up as far as like, you're asking like, what does the state expect as like, it's this to be the.
Right, well, we always want to beat that anyway, but I'll just, like the IEPs are some of those students that are missing that compensatory ed, they're probably factored into this, and once they get that, it'll move that number, I would assume.
Yeah, ideally, we would assume that maybe 2019 is so much lower because of the previous years and lost instruction. So maybe those are students that will improve. There's a lot of things that play into graduation rate for students with disabilities, and one of them being just course offerings. So if I'm a student with a disability and I have to meet the same graduation requirements of a student without a disability, then what supports and curricular options are available for me to help better support me to achieve that? That's a big part of graduation rates for students with disabilities, as well as attendance. I'm guessing if we looked at this data and you looked at the attendance data and students with disabilities in high schools, I bet it's very, very low. And so, again, that plays into, there's a lot of factors that play into why it is the way that it is.
Okay. And I realize we're all asking a lot. This is more than we've ever gotten. So I appreciate that, and I want to acknowledge that. But obviously, we want to see some more information in other areas, but it's a great starting point. I want to say that. I think we've came a long way from where we were because we would have never saw this stuff before. So, did you have a question? Director Gordon?
I just thought of this. Do we have the data from 2015-16 year? Because I know that's the first year after they closed JB, and I'd be interested in what the graduation rates before and after that happened look like.
Sure we do. Yeah, we could look that up. Lisa's vigorously taking notes.
I am.
You can just send that in an email to the board.
Yep, that's what we plan on. Bird. Okay.
You still got one more section.
Got one more area. Yep.
Any other questions on this?
All right. Let's move into our final section here on dropout rate. So if you can go, Brenda. Kim, you know you're going to be asked more questions, but that's all right. No, you can go back there. I just trying to save you some steps.
I was getting ready to turn the mic on and call her out too.
That'll wait too. If you can go down to dropout, please. Keep going. All right. So same structure here. A dropout, again, I'm going to give you time to read through how that is calculated and what that means. So, but basically, a student was enrolled at school sometime in the previous year and was not enrolled as of count day of October 1st in the current year, or was enrolled and did not complete the school year, did not graduate from any other school, did not get transfer to another school. They document all those different pieces. Did not go to a private school, did not go, whatever those cases may be. That's kind of that first slide there. A few notes on the second slide, and then again, I'll give you time to read through all of it. If they get their high SED, the GED, that is considered a dropout. So in case that question is popped up there. And then that calculation, the numerator is the total number of dropouts in the school year as determined by that previous slide, with the denominator being the fall enrollment for grades that is being calculated. So that's, and again, you'll have a chance to go back through that and ask questions. And then on that last slide there, the last couple slides shows that dropout rate. So if you want to keep going through there, it shows the dropout rate. And I do want to note that the state uses the 7 through 12 dropout rate.
Do you need something for clarification?
Yeah, so at what point, it says didn't finish the school year, but was enrolled, at the beginning of the school year, or didn't, does somebody fill out a form saying they're dropping out? Or at what point does it go from just absent to dropout, I guess is my question, because that's kind of important information.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have staff that work vigorously in getting kids and confirming where are if a kid is not in school and they're marked absent every day up through October 1st, and that's considered that at a high school level, or 7 through 12, that they have dropped out. If we don't get a request for records from another school, from a private school, from another state, or any other reason to show where they went. So our principals and buildings work very hard to confirm where these kids are and to get them pulled into school. So no, there's not like you have to come in to do an official form. We do have that, so we can better track and try to have exit slips, exit forms about why kids are dropping out. But as far as these numbers, it's based on they were enrolled on a number, then the next year they were not anymore. And if they ever marked absent, then they're required to be dropped off of our rosters if they are not showing up until that October 1st enrollment date.
If say you just stopped showing up in March,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't be considered a dropout until the following fall.
Correct, till October 1st. So you can, in March, stop coming to school and then show up in August. You're still on. That's not reflected in here.
Okay. And if you came in ninth grade and then showed up again 2 years later, you'd factor into some dropout data?
You would have been marked as a dropout for that year that you did not show up for 10th grade, but then you would have been back into that end population for the future grade again.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
It's tricky. It's confusing because a kid could come and go multiple times throughout the year, but if it's those 2 October 1st deadlines that it's you were and you were not, that's a dropout.
Okay.
So now moving back over to our data here. So again, you can kind of see self-explanatory overall. And again, what I was saying is the 7 through 12 and the way that it's done by subgroup is only through 7 through 12. We put the 9 through 12 dropout rate because that is also numbers that we keep our eye on, but at the state level, they look at the 7 through 12 rate. So similar to before, if you want to set the timer there, Superintendent Schneckloth, for 5 minutes for some review, and then we'll dig into the questions for the last piece.
What's the state average on this? What's the state average?
For dropout?
I have it pulled up for
Okay.
total, all kids. 2.2 this year. And TJ, that's for 9-12 on their website, not 7-12. That 2.2 is for 9-12.
Okay.
That's what's on their website, not, they don't even have a chart for 7-12. That's weird, right?
Okay.
Anyway, I just wanted to make that distinction.
shared with me, and thank you. I wish I could come just because I would enjoy doing it with you. I know. It was. Yes, thank you. Hey.
Ready.
But have you been there? Please.
Ready?
Oh, I'm ready. Are you ready? Sorry. Let's do it.
Now we need Michael Buffer. Let's get ready. Director Beck.
Kind of a lot of the same questions about the subgroups.
Yeah.
A little more context, especially with some of the groups of that I know we don't have a lot of students of. Native American, for example. And then my other question was, what happened in 2017, 2018, where the percentages of African American and 2 or more races were so much higher than any other year? Because those are groups of students we know are relatively large, so it's not necessarily a sample size issue, but it's like the number of students who dropped out was so much bigger that year, and that was pre-pandemic, so that would be my question.
Good question. You write that one too.
Director Gordon. I'm going to jump around now.
I found it interesting that there was no dropouts for Native Americans the first 2 years on the chart, but then it increased substantially from 17-18 to then 18-19 with 5.88%, and then an even larger jump the next year. And I just wondered if that reflects enrollment of that population as well. Have we seen an increase in Native population? And then I also, just like with the other data, I'd be curious to see the dropout rates from the year before JV closed and after as well.
Sure.
Director Hayes.
I can echo the last 2 comments, but one thing that was consistent pretty much was the Asian groups was the lowest in each year. And with the 17-18 possibly not having any enrolled maybe, but they were consistently lower than all of the other groups.
Director Klein Jerome.
Again, I would like real numbers. What, like in 2019-20, 4.54%. How many students is that? And then also, and maybe just rhetorical, how do kids in 7th and 8th grade legally drop out when compulsory education is to 16? I mean, are those the kids that we should be taking it all the way to the courts? Because you don't have the right to drop out till you're 16. So I'm not that I don't know that junior high kids drop off the face of the earth sometimes, but
Yeah, I think for those kids, and I'm making an inference here, that more likely it would be those students that move away, and we request records where the students or they move to Tennessee. That school is supposed to request records from us, and sometimes if a kid moves away and we don't get a request for records, that is reflected as a dropout because they're not enrolled here and they're also not enrolled officially anywhere else. When we get a request for records, it indicates and flags with us that they're now enrolled somewhere else and therefore they're not a dropout. But that is a challenge, absolutely.
Director Hayes, you had a question you forgot?
I forgot one question. Students that we have expelled for a period of time, if they're not back registered or enrolled by October 1st, are they still considered a dropout, say if their return is in November? If they're out in the end of October this year and then they come back the end of October after the 1st, are they considered dropout even if they're just expelled? Do we count them?
Yeah, I'm actually going to the definition to see that. I mean, that's
For data collection purposes, those students would still be marked expelled to that point. When a student returns to school, we do reentry meetings, reenter them into our system, and go from there. And then the coding moves forward as in attendance. I think does that answer your question, Mr. President?
Director Potts. Director Poston.
Really don't have any else to add, just the big jump in, 2016, 17, 2017, 18 in a couple categories. That's about it.
I agree with Director Kleinstrom. It would be nice to see actual numbers to this, what the percentage is of. I mean, it puts it in a little more perspective. Obviously, there's different factors for different things, and we don't know all of them, and it would probably take like 3 meetings for you to get through all that, and I understand that. Again, I'm glad that we are collecting the data on this and trying to put together a game plan on what we're going to do going forward. And I'm assuming with the kids that have dropped out, there's programs out there to get them back in, to get them their credits. And I would be curious to know how many of these students were like a credit or 2 away from getting it done, that they could just come back, take a couple classes and get it done. Or are they so far behind that it would be a huge uphill thing where they need 20 credits? Because what it's 26 or 28? 26 credits to graduate. So I'd be curious on that number myself. But any other questions? Again, thank you all very, very much. Thanks for joining us at the big kid table there, Ms. Hoffman. We appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for jotting down the notes. I'm sure you went through a whole notepad there, it looked like. So
It's all right.
we appreciate that very much in presenting the data to us. I would imagine you'll be bringing something back to us with some updated data in the future. So.
Well, I think first of all, thanks, Kim, for jumping up here with us. Much appreciated. And it's very important for us to hear the way that you want this data presented, because in order for us to be consumers of it, it has to make sense to you. I've jotted down a couple other notes, if I might share. I think it would be beneficial to have some notes attached to the charts for us to preview ahead of time, to maybe get some of those questions, clarifying questions. So those are some of the process that as an agenda committee, I suggest that we review and dig into that. Because I think that would be beneficial going through that. But the first thing we have to do is know exactly what it is what is our issue? What do we identify as our biggest rocks, and then go after them and attack them with everything that we have. And this is the first step. And this data, we have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of things stacked against us, but I really believe in our team that we have assembled. I believe that the board is going to keep asking those questions, and we're going to want to come back to you with some solutions for our students. So, Jake and Lisa, thank you so much for putting this together. I know this is very time consuming. I know that when I look at this sheet in 2016, 17, I'd like the board to reflect on the things that we had to do in that year with the budget cuts in those years as we've gone along here, right sizing, and it's happened very fast for us. And so this work that these 2 human beings right here are doing was done by a team of people in the past, and this was their only job. And so as we come out on the other side of financial stability, those jobs now fall on Jake and Lisa, and I think you've done a fantastic job presenting this data. Now it's time to reorient ourselves. I think it's a great lesson tonight that we don't always have to reinvent the wheel on some of the items that were there. Just pick them back up and run with them, and that's very energizing to me as I've heard the board members ask questions about things that we had solid plans for, and then identifying those that weren't. So thank you guys very much for that. The second presentation that we have involves our. Thank you guys. Involves our. Kim, you might just want to stay up here. Ben, thank you so much for jumping in. Much appreciated. In terms of some of this stuff, as we started the school year, Ben really took the lead on implementing some of that online learning and done a fantastic job. The reason why I wanted Kim to stay up here is we do have an opening on our cabinet, and right now Kim and myself are filling that role. So the director of learning, equity and learning and student equity and results in student supports position, the special education position, state and federal program position. Right now, Kim and I are filling that void. And so the team that we have up here with us today are our state and federal programs team. We have Jen Van Fleet. She is the federal program specialist. She's also working very closely with our ELL students and some other duties as assigned. As you saw earlier, going through her administrative degree, she is working with our Unified Champions. And then we have Heather Harland, our budget specialist, and she oversees a handful of budgets, and state and federal programs is one of them. And so that second half of that job is the special education position. So I just want you to see that this is how that void is being filled right now. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move forward. What we would like to present to you today is the first viewing of our modified allowable growth plan. And Heather's going to bring up our memo, and we're going to talk to you about what is modified allowable growth. Why are we bringing it in here? What are the rules for it? How is it calculated, and things of that nature. So first of all, thank you two for being here. And Kim, that's really why I wanted you to stay up here. So you're more than welcome to stay. But I wanted you guys to get a visual representation of how that void is being filled right now on an interim basis. So that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to go over kind of the nuts and bolts of modified allowable growth, sharing with you the memo that we're going to present. And then we're going to get right into the line item pieces of that budget and allow you to ask your questions, discuss, and things of that nature. And then we're going to bring that to you for a vote on December 15th. The reason why that's coming to you now is because it's a requirement to have the minutes. The board must vote on that, and the requirements to upload the minutes by January 15th. Whew, got it right. Okay, with that being said, Heather, if you wouldn't mind, walk us through our memo and just what is modified allowable growth.
December 13th.
Huh?
December.
We're voting December 13th?
Yes.
I just had to remove the mask so I didn't hyperventilate. Okay, so modified allowable growth is an MSA supplement that supports pretty much all the things that Jake and Lisa went over. Mostly your dropout prevention, returning dropouts, and your at-risk youth. We have actually been requesting this for about 30 years, and I've watched it evolve over the last 15. One of the newest requirements is that the board actually oversees and approves the programming along with the request for the extra dollars. So what MSA means is that we get what your base per pupil dollars at $7,900, and then we get 5% on top of that because we're considered an at-risk district. So today, we're going to go over the line item budgets that, like I said, a lot of the items support what Jake and Lisa went over, and just getting your guys' approval on the items that are there and answer any questions about what is served or what, if you have any questions on how it's served, and then the dollar amount and how we and how we come to that dollar amount. One of the pieces of MSA is not only are we going to ask for about $5 million, we're actually going to say as a district, we're going to provide another match of about 1.7 million. So this is a whole program that's not just supplemental funding. It's actually, it's a program that's kind of marries the two together. It kind of reminds me of putting a stake in the game. The district says we're going to support this portion of it, which is 25%, and then the state comes back and says we're going to give you the 75% to make it whole. So instead of going over every verbatim of the memo that was given to you, because it looks the same every year, it gives you kind of the definition of what a dropout is, what a potential dropout and what a returning dropout is. But I think one of the critical pieces is just understanding how we get those dollars so that when you see it administered by line item budget, you can understand where that all comes from.
Any questions over that section?
You referred to us as what type of district to get the extra?
We are considered an at-risk district, so the level of dropouts kind of signifies that or kind of targets that piece for us. So there are districts across the state of Iowa that are not they are not allowed to request the full 5%. Sometimes it's 1% weighted, but since our dropouts and are identified at risk or potential, so I don't want to say that we have a high number of dropouts. It's that we have a lot of kids who are considered at risk, whether that's poverty, attendance, connection to school. There's lots of factors in there, but we have a lot of those students that have those identifications, and therefore we are allowed to request the full 5% weighted dollars. So I don't know, do we want to go to the line item budget?
Yes. Okay. So Brenda, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the line item budget. So what I thought we would do is just review each one of these programs very briefly and allow the board to ask any questions in regards to what we are proposing. And I'll go through these as quick as possible. If you have any questions, how would you like to do that, President Goes at the end or as we go?
What's going to be easier for you?
Let's do them at the end?
Okay.
Okay. So IJAG. IJAG is a program that we have. You can see the dollar amounts that are there. I'm not going to read the dollar amounts, but I'm just going to go briefly into that. We have this program, 11th, 12th grade at our high schools, is provided at Central and West, and we're looking at implementing that deeper at North. This program employs staff members to really give our students college and career experiences. Credit recovery program services through the summer school. Every year we deploy staff members to identify students that are credit deficient and really put them on a caseload and get them in and give them every opportunity to graduate. And that's something that we've been doing for quite a while. Typically we house that in one school and have a program coordinator and several teachers for that. Our reading interventionist, this is one of our biggest bucket items, and obviously students that are struggling with their reading grow up and really struggle as they move through their educational experiences. And so this reading interventionist bucket, we employ enough reading interventionists to fit one at every elementary school. The next piece that you see is we have a dropout support specialist. We have the ability to code sections of those people to that identify the area of needs listed over here. So in terms of professional development, what they provide for our dropout prevention, that allows us to code those sections to there. Our juvenile court liaisons at each one of our high schools, and I believe we have these in our middle schools. This is a program that we've had for many years, and we're going to continue to move forward with. Truancy Liaison. This goes back to the question that you had, Karen. This is a full-time position in our district that when we have difficulties identifying where a student is, we can attach this person to that family and really dig in, do home visits, try and find that student, and then if necessary, move forward with any kind of charges that may be due to a truancy issue. The other big bucket that we have are our campus security positions. This was a change, and I think Davenport was a leader for this change. Dr. Tate went back and asked for the MSA for a 1 year only, and then that year they changed the rules that allowed you to put security guards in your dropout prevention. So this is where we moved our security guards into this position. I will tell you, our campus security and supervisors, they're assigned mainly to our junior high and high schools, and they're more than that. They make personal connections with students. They're ensuring the safety of our students as well. When we moved our campus security out of our elementary schools, we added behavior support paras into every one of our schools. And so these behavior support paras have a specific program. They are assigned to be check-in, check-out. Check-in, check-out? I get check-in, check-out, and check and connect sometimes confused. One of them's way more intense than the other one. But check-in, check-out, they help first respond with students. They help calm students down, help get students back into class as soon as possible. They're also a part of that student intervention team, and they can be assigned students. They can be really just a huge resource to our elementary schools. We have 5 social workers built into this budget. Those social workers are at each one of our high schools and our 2 most at-risk junior highs, which I believe right now are Smart and Williams, I believe. Now this is the part where we can code a section to our high school associate principals. So in each one of our high schools, we have high school principals, associate principals that are assigned to be in charge of the at-risk programming in the schools. They're dealing with discipline, dropout prevention, all of those kinds of things, helping assist students from being at risk, dropping out, all of those things. And our district-wide counselor time as well. The alternative, this part down here, our learning support specialist, this is a full-time position that's housed at Mid-City. And this person oversees a lot of the dropout prevention stuff that's going on there, oversees the reconnection labs at Mid-City, and just a vital piece. This was the first step that we did, I believe, in 17, 18, where we moved specialists from ASC into the building. This is also how we provide support to Mid-City. This line to Mid-City used to be much larger. This is the only line item out of the modified allowable growth budget to Mid-City. The redirection program for dropout prevention, when we closed Keystone, we added redirection programs to each one of our high schools, 1 junior high and 1 middle school. The 3 high schools are programs that are here. They're alternatives to suspensions. When you think of these programs, they're on-ramps back into the least restrictive environment for students. And so, Heather, if you wouldn't mind explaining our match and this bottom part of this line item budget. Thank you.
Okay, so we are asking the state for our MSA request is actually $5,207,993. That is the 5% weighted dollars on top of our per pupil. But like I told you, that's only 75% of our total program. So then we backfill with the 25% of existing resources. So those are those people that are, or programs in the buildings that are really doing that work with these kids that are not directly coded or are not part of those additional funds. So within that, we've identified, like TJ said, we took supports from Mid-City, but we didn't really take supports from Mid-City. They were kind of absorbed in our general fund, and so they became part of our program as a match. So we identified their administrators. We had identified some of their counselor time and any additional teacher time if we were to say compare them to a non-alternative high school and look at our ratios. So we do that research, and then our high school and intermediate counselors. So we know that that's where we really start looking, and I think the data showed from the last presentation, that 7th through 12th grade. So we know that a high number of their time is really spent with keeping the kids in school, that dropout prevention tool. So all of those are kind of in a mix, and then that makes up our 1.7 million. That's the match funds that is on top of the dollars they give us. It's like having that kind of skin in the game. And so our total program for our dropout prevention is at 6.9 million, with marrying the two pieces together. Any questions?
So at this time, President, we'll turn it over to you to see if there's any questions.
Director Caution?
So on our local match, 25% local match, what portion of that is administration?
So you're asking how much of it's principals? It's probably about 25% principals. It's mostly counselors.
Okay, so when you're saying administration, it's principals and counselors?
Yeah,
Okay.
it would not be district level administration. It's definitely hands-on in the buildings.
Director Klein-Jerome?
Under Truancy Liaison, the Truancy Liaison works in collaboration with the Truancy Officer. Now, do we have a Truancy Officer or just have the liaison? I guess I'm confused.
We have both of those. So our district-wide SRO, that's where all of our truancy paperwork is processed. So Sergeant Quick processes all of our truancy paperwork.
So he's considered the Truancy Officer.
He is our district level SRO. And so yes, one of his titles is truancy officer, but we don't call him our truancy officer. He's
Right. But that's where he would fit
Yes.
in this. Okay.
Absolutely. In this, using that language, that he is our truancy officer.
Okay.
Director Beck?
I've got a couple questions. The dropout support specialist, based on the description, it seems like an awful lot of work for 5% of an FTE. I'm confused it's like 5% of one position. So I get it. It's 5% of a specialist position is dedicated to this. But that's not very much time for all of this stuff that's supposed to be going on.
So what we do is we prorate the exact percentage that we believe that person is spending, and that's that number. So that person is a full-time human being, but this is the services that you see here that are allowable inside of here. We go through kind of like a time audit, a time stamp, and find out exactly how much of that professional development to school staff, based on those key factors, is that person doing, because that's what's allowable.
Oh, so this is just for the professional development that this person is providing? That's what we're paying for there?
That's correct. So he supports our buildings with their basically I don't know how to explain it. He's kind of their backbone. He gives them that direction,
Right.
but they're actually implementing. I also want to note that particular positions also funded out of what we call at-risk dollars, which kind of sit before the dropout prevention, but are not reflected in these total. We don't have to request that dollar amount. So I would say that between the two of them, they really probably cover what you see there in that description. So I understand it does seem like a little bit of time for everything he does, and I'm pretty sure that position would agree with you. But yes, he's not that front line. He's that almost like that backbone. So that would be where that 5% would come in.
Okay. And so I guess my other question would be, where was it? Oh yeah. So we have 5 social workers, and then each of our associate principals are doing support work as well. Would it be a better investment of our time and money to hire an additional social worker or counselors and not have the associate principals do that work?
So either we could investigate that
But we'd still have to pay for the money out of this.
Exactly.
General.
Okay. And then my last question is the redirection people at the very bottom there. That's 3 positions, right? And at this rate, that's like $60-ish thousand a year. Are we supplementing that with any extra money, or are these people doing what I would consider a tough, emotionally tough job?
No, we absolutely supplement that with
Okay.
general funds. And so when Keystone closed, there was we had to find savings in all areas.
Right.
But we allocated general funds and these funds to create those programming. So there's a teacher and a para educator in each one of those rooms, and probably more additional staff than that. Actually, it might be, is it a teacher and 2 paras? I don't know off the top of my head.
I think you're right with saying a teacher and 1 para, and then at our highest need buildings, we have layered in a student support liaison. But what you see there represents 3 full-time teachers. So just
Okay,
3
but
FTE.
this isn't necessarily like,
These are the teachers. And so
Okay.
the other supports are layered in with the
Okay.
general fund line item when Keystone closed.
so that isn't the only person doing that work.
No, so what when Keystone closed, we tried to recreate at-risk departments in every single school. So you have an associate principal, a social worker, that team of people, some student success liaisons, some attendance coaches, and some graduation liaisons that are looking at their overall students that aren't going to make it, and they're creating plans for them. That's the direction that we're heading. That system is exactly how we're going to individualize that, and this is a piece of that.
Okay, and then just so that I want to make it clear for anybody listening, this is just part of the money that goes to paying for all of these things, right? So, for example, we may, in any given category, be using general fund dollars and not asking for, I guess I'm trying to figure out how much we're paying people to do this work, right? So I'm not articulating it very well. Let me think about a way to ask the question, and then I'll come back to it.
Well, I think it's important to understand that these are salaries. And so every once in a while, we have to reduce things inside this budget because the salaries grow every year. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, is the money doesn't grow to keep up with the salaries that are in there. Because we know that buying humans to work with our most at-risk students is the biggest bang for our buck. And so inside of this program, Dr. Beck, they're all fully funded teachers out of that program. The only partial thing that you saw was that professional development at the top.
Okay.
Because we feel the work that person does fit perfectly in there.
Okay.
So I think to reflect your time, the counselors, there's a chunk of the high school principals, but outside of that, they're full-time employees.
Okay.
That's a good question. And I can get you the full salaries of those people if that's helpful. Did that answer?
Director Potts? Director Hayes? Director Gordon?
I don't think I have a question. I don't know. I was just trying to figure out how to word something, and then as soon as you said my name, it like, so, I guess I'm interested, how do we know for sure that these things will be funded through the MSA? So if we're relying on salaries for multiple employees being covered by this, what happens if one year they're just like, no? Like, is that something that could happen? Or, I guess that's my question.
This is a pretty sustainable funding source. It's on the aid and levy. It's our supplemental funding. So I get what you're saying. There's a lot of staff in there, and it is categorical. It's not part of our general budget. For kind of a reference, this year we saw an increase of $100,000. So, but our increases from year to year, just like our allowable growth and our per pupil, do not usually match how quickly our rates go up with our staff, including insurances and benefits. So we monitor this very closely. We have a team that looks at, and we actually have several teams, and Jen can kind of contest to the people who, because she works with so many different groups, but they look at the priority of the district. We look at the services that they're providing. We pull the data, look at, are we getting the most bang for our buck for those positions? Are they making a difference? And making sure that every year we're able to stay within our allocation or our request amount per se. And keep in mind that you're actually looking at what we'll be doing for the 22-23 school year. So when you're looking at putting that in December, it gives you a lot of lead time that if a position needs to be reduced, or we need to look at the effectiveness and if it's even working, that we have that time to either reduce. If it's a teacher, it's done within time so that they can be looking for open positions. So I think we have a real good handle on monitoring that situation. And so one of the references here is that we had a $100,000 increase in our allocation. When I did my staffing projections, I was given something from my CFO for a percentage, and I think it's fairly, I don't want to say heavy, but I definitely think we have enough room in there. I like to pad things just to know that if we see a cut mid-year, we can sustain that without losing staff.
Was that all you had, Director Gordon? Director Beck?
Given that, I mean, we keep hearing about how the mental health of our students has been affected by the pandemic, and based on the numbers we just saw, the students who are probably the most at risk because of the pandemic are the same students we would find sort of in this population, right? Or the students who need the most support. Are we able to use any ESSER money to bolster those supports for a couple of years until things start to level out again? And would that be included here, or would that be a separate thing and they'd be extra people?
So we can absolutely add on ESSER funds to this area. And ESSER funds, we're usually held to a supplanting rule, but ESSER funds can be added on absolutely. We know that when we come out on the other end of this pandemic, this is going to be the budget and Title I where we're going to sustain the items that have worked through the pandemic for us, that we learned our different strategies and our new strategies. Right now, these programs are working for our students that are in the like IJAG. I was talking with the instructor the other day, and the opportunities that they're presenting at Central to his students are just outstanding. We know that when we come out of the other side of the pandemic that we are going to have to do something different. And right now, we can add ESSER dollars to either add more of this. An example we have. We only had a graduation liaison. We only have one in the district. We now have one in every building with a student success liaison in a lab, because we had the playbook for that because it was in here. So there's an example of where we absolutely did that. And we plan to continue to do that and do some pilot programs to where we can see the effectiveness of it, and then potentially come out on the other side of the pandemic and make necessary changes. That's a good question. Thank you.
Director Poston?
I just want to be sure that I'm clear on this. So this has been going on for the past 30 years, okay? And so you make your application. So the positions that were filled last year, are they being, the same positions being supplemented, or in some cases, some of the same positions being supplemented, or are these all new positions versus what was done last year?
These are all existing positions. I think over to the one side, it's all continuing programming. In this 22-23 school year, we don't anticipate any new programming. And I can say I've been doing this budget for a very long time, and a lot of these positions I see in here have been in there 10 years. I think the newest would be probably the Redirection program, but that's probably our newest program, but it's even been in there a few years also. So no, we're not doing new hiring. This is all existing programming that's at least 3 to 5 years, if not longer.
So has there ever been a time where you've been denied any of the funding?
No,
Okay.
not at all.
Director Kleindrum?
I'm assuming since this is bargaining has not happened, negotiations, you, though, kind of project there will be an increase in salaries and benefits, and so that is put into this in play. So these salaries are not current salaries, it's what you think you're gonna pay next year.
That's correct. I worked with our CFO, Kevin, and he told me to do a 5%. It could be either on salaries or benefits, but so I increased by 5%. And that's where I was talking about that padding, so.
And have you ever put in a padding that then turns out to be, it wasn't enough? And then have you had to quick make a change, or?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. No, I haven't. That's just not how I work. TJ's worked with me for a very long time, and it actually drives him a little crazy. I pad pretty heavy.
Okay.
Just so that you never want somebody to lose you don't ever want to cut a position or it's not really even a cut a position. You never want to have a net effect to your general fund. You want to make sure that this is sustainable in itself. And so, no, we don't ever do that.
Thank you.
Director Austin?
And you may have already mentioned this too, but just to refresh my memory, where are the dollars actually coming from?
They're state funds.
State funds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do we ever get federal dollars to support at-risk?
We do not. The closest thing we have right now is our ESSER funding. We get Title I dollars to support our title buildings. That's at the elementary and intermediate level. That's not so much at risk, it's more poverty driven. And then the closest thing we might get to offset this would be our Title IV funds, and that's it's safe and healthy students funding, but it is not generated by at-risk counts. No.
Director Poston?
So in any way, are some of these positions or dollars or anything tied in with our ESSER funds? How is that, does that work together or not?
Well, like TJ said, we have a lot of programming that's happening in ESSER that essentially when ESSER goes away, they would definitely qualify for this because we're serving our at-risk. One of the positions would be our, what did we call it, graduation liaison. They're working with those kids. We increased it from 1 for the district, which we had for about 10 years, to having 3 across the district, 1 at each high school, and that was put into place by ESSER. Now, when ESSER expires in 2024, that's where, as we start approaching that date, we need to be looking at the work that they're doing and how we sustain that, and that could possibly be in this fund.
Any other questions? Did you ever remember what you were trying to get to? Okay.
No. Yeah, I think he got it.
Okay. Did you figure out what you had wanted?
What I said was it.
Okay.
I'd just like to say, though, I appreciate the fact that you realize there has to be an exit plan for ESSER. It always makes me nervous that we are spending money that's not going to be there and sustain things. So the fact that you're already saying, we know this isn't going to be after 2024, that there is plans for an exit. Thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. I don't know if this group knows, but that's part of what I do. I do both sides of this. So I do the budget you have here in front of you, and then I do all ESSER. So I'm on the ESSER committee. And so, yes, they marry very well together, and having representation for both sides is pretty critical when you're looking at sustainability. So I'm definitely that budget girl that's going to be raising my hand going, remember, these dollars end, where do they go next? So yes, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
You can clearly tell our board members are on the finance committee. If there are no other questions, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
This is going for a vote on December 13th.
Oh, that's right. Whoops, I about blew that one. Are you comfortable with I'll go around the horn here and then ask everyone where you're at or what other information you need. Yeah. Director Klein-Jerome, do you need any other information to fill?
Nope.
Director Postian?
Nope.
Director Beck? Director Hayes?
Nope.
Director Gordon? Director Potts? Great presentation. Thanks for including all that information and giving us a rundown on everything. Did you need anything else? You're pretty comfortable with that? Obviously, we'll be voting on it on the 13th, not the 15th.
Well, we have to upload the minutes to January 15th.
What's that?
We have to upload the minutes from the December 13th meeting to January 15th.
Okay.
So we're ahead of schedule on that.
Perfect. Now, this is Director Potts' favorite time, so I'll lean over on him for board reflections.
I would say my most important reflection would be the conversations that we had about attendance, graduation, and the dropout rate. I think we spent an hour and a half, and I think we asked some very clear questions that created a need for clarification and for a little different presentation of that data so that it becomes more relevant and more useful to us and perhaps more meaningful.
Thank you, Director Gordon.
As a new board member, I just appreciate the time that the cabinet puts into pulling together this and then presenting it to us in such a way that is easy to understand and being open to questions and willing to get us the information that we are still requesting.
Thank you, Director Hayes.
I appreciate both discussions, really the graduation dropout, and that was very important, but I think I enjoy Cal's in particular because we have a lot of the information that is not rushed through, it's explained in detail, and we can actually have a real fruitful discussion with it, so it helps us later. As an example, with this right now, although we've done it for a number of years each year, this is the most detail that I've had on it since we've done it. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Director Klein-Jerome.
I agree with Director Potts. I think we had some great questions and some clarifying things that we need in the future when looking at these things. And I want to really give a shout out to Heather. I appreciate you being on ESSER and keeping people balanced and saying there is an end to this, so keep that in mind. Thank you very much.
Director Postian.
I'll agree with everything was said. And again, I'd like to thank the staff for presenting all the information that you did, and we sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Beck.
It's nice to see, I mean, I agree with what everybody else has said, but it's also nice to see data being presented before we vote on it, which we didn't always used to see, but also when we ask questions about the data, you know, we're actually having real conversations and looking at what we can expect or what we can look for in the future. And I really appreciate that transparency. It's not always pretty, but we're actually looking at what's going on in our district, and I appreciate that. And also thank you to all of the staff who put in a lot of time on these presentations and listened to all of our questions. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Superintendent Schneckloff, what do you got?
Well, as in with all the presentations, I'm going to speak for our staff, our principals, our teachers, everyone, our food service, everyone that works in this district. When we look at this data, we have to do better. And so I think the best thing that we can do is continue to bring it here, because that's the accountability piece that I think, find that cadence. You know, we're presenting data, but every time we present it, we get better feedback from you about what it is that you want to know. That's the first one. You know, this is our first run at bringing this data to you, and now we know and we feel that we've got to do better. This is critical. This is urgent. And we have the best staff. We really do. And so I know that we can accomplish gains, and I'm excited to see it. The second part is I saw things pre-pandemic that were working. And we need to make sure that we don't throw those things away and recreate the wheel. They're there. There's playbooks that work. We need to ensure that we're streamlining, picking up the things that were working. So those are my big takeaways from today. Thank you for asking me.
I don't know why I always go last, because everybody else says something that I wanted to say. Again, great presentations tonight. Thank you to the staff. It is nice to have things presented to us, but also take the feedback and not give us excuses and things like that. I greatly appreciate that. I'm glad that we have game plans in place and to address these issues and things like that. Thank you to all of you that backfill that opening cabinet. It's not open per se, but it's part-time filled by Ms. Hoffman there, and we greatly appreciate that. With that, Director Potts, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.